Getting stories from the edge where the healing begins.
Welcome to another episode of the Old Paratrooper Podcast, a podcast where we talk to a wide variety of guests from all walks of life, with the main objective of raising awareness for mental health issues within the armed forces and the emergency services communities. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. It helps massively in getting the messages out there. Today's guest, proudly to have on the podcast, is former Special Air Service legend and author, Mr. Bob Shepherd. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and it's an honour to be on your program, Chris. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. The honour's all mine. Thank you very much for taking the time and setting aside a bit of time to come on. I always appreciate. I love talking to guys of your generation from special forces and hearing about your exploits. It's kind of, I don't find this. Never find this a chore. I find it massively interesting talking to you guys.
Thank you.
No, thank you. As I explained to you briefly then, what I like to do with all the guests is I like to get a bit of a background about kind of where they grew up, what they were like as a kid, and, you know, ultimately what led them down the route into the military, and in your case, onwards to the kind of Special Air Service. So, yeah, over to you, Bob.
Right. Well, given the type of stuff that you do and you cover, and especially those that may be suffering with, mentally post military and, police, fire and paramedics, etc. I'll be very upfront with everything that I say. I won't candy coat anything. The first thing I want to say, because I don't know where this is heading in the next however long, is that this is a discussion. This is not a manifesto by Bob Shepherd. So if there are people listening that disagree with what I'm saying, I'm all for it. I'm all for discussion. Okay, so here we go. School of hard knocks, like lots of other people that join the military, and going back to the 1950s into the 60s, I grew up at the rough end of Dundee, place on the west side called Lochee. It was predominantly Irish immigrants, of which my family is part of, and they came out of the fields in Ireland off the farms to go and work in the jute mills in Dundee. As I was growing up, the jute mills or the workforce disappeared to India, or the companies did. So they had a cheaper workforce, the companies were making more money. And the people of Dundee or Lochee that were working in those mills were on their backsides. There was nothing else to go to. So I grew up in I suppose it would be deprivation of the era, no different than Glasgow, parts of Edinburgh, parts of London at the time as well, and other major cities throughout the United Kingdom. I grew up in a Victorian tenement building, sharing a toilet on the outside landing with 3 other families. It was absolutely minging, and it was just a toilet. There's no hand basin or anything. It was just torn up newspaper, put on an old wire coat hanger, and it was just like nobody cleaned the toilet. My parents drank. My father battered my mother like a rag doll, and when I thought I was old enough to step in, I'd get battered as well. So the plan was to run away from home. I tried to run away at 10, but I chickened out and came back to another battering. And I got a plan together with the help of a football coach, and I ran away from home. He got me a railway ticket and a chance to go and have a trial with a fairly lowly but professional team, Bristol Rovers. And I went from Dundee to Bristol. And at that time, although I was 14, I was malnourished. I thought I was the new Jimmy Johnson, the Scots guy that used to play on the wing, played for Celtic. I didn't support Celtic, but I loved Jimmy Johnson. I just wanted to be him. And he was tiny as well, And anyway, I went down to Bristol. I couldn't understand anybody. They all spoke like pirates. And of course, they couldn't understand me. And they were quite frightening, actually, with the accent, especially if they were all bigger than me and a bit gruff. And I'm like, wow, did I make the right decision here? Anyway, I passed my trials at youth level. I signed on as a youth footballer. And at the time, Swindon Town were a league above. There were just the four divisions, first division to fourth division. No Premiership back then. And a lot of the professional players even had side jobs because they weren't getting paid that much money. So they were playing football for the love of it, especially at the level that I was trying to get myself in at. And cut a long story short, as much as I loved the football down there and as much as it was a new chapter in my life, I never looked back. I didn't look back to Dundee. I just looked forward. I didn't make the grade. I moved to Swindon Town. That was a league above. And as soon as I moved, they won the League Cup. They beat Arsenal as complete underdogs in the final. And a laddie called Don Rogers played on the wing. He was their hero, and he looked more like a rugby player than a footballer. And because of all the revenue that they made from it, basically 6 of us got the heave-ho. And one of my coaches said, listen, Bob, you're a bright lad. You're mature, even though you look younger than you really are. I would suggest you go and join the Paras. And he had been in the Paras years ago. I think he covered, Palestine and that type of era, going way back. So off I go downtown to join the Paras. And all the recruitment offices were in the same street, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. And I look in the window of the first one that I came to, and there's a poster of a paratrooper coming down under his canopy. And I'm like, wow. So I walk in and I'm like, excuse me, is this where you come to join the Paras? Sit down, son. I signed on to the RAF Regiment. And it was a blessing. And here we go. I joined the RAF Regiment. I did recruit training. I actually signed on at 16. My birthday, my 17th birthday was in the November. And I joined as a recruit, the first intake, just after New Year in January 1972. And, breezed through the training, absolutely ate it up. I loved it. But there's a few things that I had to understand. The first one was I wasn't religious, even though I was brought up as a Catholic. But the explanation I've just given you of my upbringing will kind of tell you as to why I went my own path. So Sunday morning comes and it's church parade. And I'm thinking in my bed, well, I'm not religious, so I don't need to go, obviously. So I get my running kit on and I go for a run round the airfield. And when I make it back, the military police or the RAF police are there waiting for me. Is your name Shepherd? Yeah. Why were you not at church parade? Well, I'm not religious. Yes, you are. Everybody in the military is religious. No, mate. Don't call me mate. I'm corporal. Anyway, like I say, there's a lot of things I had to get right, even though I was loving my military career so far. So I'm taken to jail, and an officer shows up a few hours later, and he asks me why I wasn't on church parade, and I say the same thing, and he goes, no, you're Church of Scotland. I'm like, I'm not. No, you are. So from that day on, for the rest of my 23 years, I was Church of Scotland, and I went to every church parade I had to go to.
Lesson
So
learned.
there's, like I say, a few things I had to understand. And I spent the next 2 weeks realising that I was Church of Scotland as I was scrubbing pans in the cookhouse for my misdemeanour. So I went from there to the RAF Regiment training, 10 weeks at the depot. I then volunteered for the parachute squadron, which is actually a field squadron with a parachute commitment. And I passed that. And as soon as I passed that, I was sent straight to Dhofar. And this is where the blessing of seeing the SAS so early. I was out in Dhofar. Basically, we were guarding Salalah airfield. It was Dhofar province is the southern province of Oman that backs right up onto the Yemen border. And communist guerrillas were coming in to try and overthrow the Sultan. So they were attacking the airfield. The Sultan's palace was actually behind the airfield, between the Salalah plain that the airfield was on and the coastline. And it was Salalah town is fairly big now. And then it was just a little village with a dirt road, you know. I mean, it goes way back, you know, very, very basic stuff. But our defensive positions supporting the airfield were called hedgehogs. We couldn't dig down because the Salalah plain was rock hard. So we built up stone sangers built of oil drums and sandbags, basically. You know, there's no Hisco baskets back then. They hadn't been invented. So it was all hands-on, filling oil drums and building up your defences. And of course, you know, you're there for 6 months, the defence gets bigger and bigger, and you're always doing something to improve it, you know. And then occasionally we get whacked by incomers, indirect fire from the mountains that were about 3 miles away. So at night, I'm 17 years old with my SLR that's taller than me, and I'm defending the position, and I'm watching green tracer coming in up on the mountains, red tracer going out, explosions in the air, Shamulis being fired, the bright lights coming down on the parachutes. And I'm asking my sergeant, who's that? What's going on up there? He said, that's the SAS, son. That's our special forces. And I said, I'd like to be up there with them. And, you know, he kind of slapped my head. And first of all, you've got to shave. Second, you know, you've got a soldier. You've got a wee bit to go yet, son, you know. But I just thought, that's where I want to be. I want to be up there with these people. As the weeks go by, some SAS units come through our hedgehogs, as we called them, in their pinky Land Rovers, and they grab a brew and they just wait for the all clear for them to go to the base of the Jebel, get dropped off and climb up onto it and do their patrolling. And I'm looking at these fellas, and to me, they seemed extremely mature, very grounded. You know, some have got beards, some haven't, some have got long hair, some haven't. They're all wearing different kit, they're carrying different weapons, yet they have this aura about them that I want to be part of, you know? I mean, I'm just loving just watching these fellas, the way they're moving. Some are in shorts and sandals, some have got DMS boots on, you know, some have got other things, you know, other footwear. And they're all chatting to each other. They're all chatting to us. How you doing? You know. Anyway, I do my trip. And all I can think of is joining the SAS. I'm being told by a couple of my NCOs who obviously grasp the idea that that's where I want to go. And they're like, right, Bob, these are the things you need to get to know from what we know, you know. Get every weapon under the sun, grasp it, know it inside out, get it stripped down in the dark, you know. You're not a mortar man, become a mortar man. Get to know the mortars, get to know how they're used, get to know how to call them in, all the rest of it. Get to know how to call in the strike masters, which were the local Omani aircraft flown by RAF people that were backing up those that were up on the Jebel. And it wasn't just the SAS up there. The Royal Engineers were up there putting in defences. And of course, there were Omani regiments up there as well, and others. The Iranians were up there at some point later. Because the Oman War went on, or the secret war as they called it, it went on from the late 60s to the mid 70s. So it went on for quite some time. So I did 3 trips out there. I did 2 trips with the RAF Regiment, and then after I passed selection, I did the last trip with the SAS, which was more of an admin trip, but there was still stuff going on. And I remember standing on the Jebel as an SAS trooper, looking down at the hedgehogs, and I knew I'd made it. And somebody asked me years ago, what's your favorite moment in the military? And that was it. From the age of 17, all I ever wanted to do was be an SAS soldier standing up on that Jebel. And although the war was coming to an end, I made it, and I made it as a 20-year-old from the RAF regiment.
Yeah,
And
it's lots of people have that kind of, that dream, but very few get to actually kind of do it.
most certainly, yeah. I think on selection, there were just under 100 on our selection, and that's to do with what was going on around the world. And it wasn't so much that lads were not allowed to come on selection because their unit was on operations or whatever. It's because the lads themselves realised that they didn't have time to do some decent preparation on the hills prior to attending selection. And good on them, they were thinking right. So I showed up, and there was less than 100. There was about 96, 97, something like that. You go into, and it was the old bashers then, Second World War huts, made of wood with, corrugated iron roofs. And it was an old stores munitions place in the Second World War. It was called Bradbury Lines before it became Sterling Lines. And that's, that's where we turned up at, So I'm in this hut with 30 odd students, and I'm getting people giggling at me because I'm walking in with an RAF beret on. What's he doing here, And, you got all the red berets of the para brigade, not just parachute regiment. And the brigade was getting hammered by the government then, It was that period where they had huge defence cuts. So you had all these lads from the para brigade coming that probably would have left it another few years had they not been, taking the brigade apart. So they're all sat in their beds and everything. They're all getting their stuff ready. And I'm looking at all these lads. I'm watching lads dubbining their boots and, preparing their maps with Fablon and all that kind of stuff, I've got none of this stuff, And so there's, when you start talking and everything, that people start asking you questions and helping you out. And after we were on the hills for a couple of weeks and the beds were becoming empty, people are like, wow, this fella's still here, And I didn't have a rank. I was an RAF regiment gunner. I was a senior aircraftsman, Nowadays they have lance corporals like the army. They didn't back then, You went from senior aircraftsman and you jumped to corporal. Well, before me, only 3 fellas had passed the SAS course from the RAF regiment. 1 was an officer and 2 were NCOs. So I was the first Tom, if you like, to pass selection. So at the end of the 90 odd that started, there was only 6 of us that passed. So I was pretty chuffed. And I'm sure, and I don't know to this day, but I'm sure they saw me as a blank slate. This guy is mega keen. He is super fit. We can turn him into what we want. He's got no bad or other idiosyncrasies that he's taken from his own regiment. He's fresh.
That's what they that's what I've sort of heard. Obviously, I was never a member of it, but
Yeah.
I've heard from the grapevine that's what they look for. They look at the people that they can mold, and people get this misconception that you've got to be 8 foot tall, and kind of, this, it's just not that the case of that. But I want to ask you about, was selection different back then, or was it the same as it kind of was this the hills, the jungle, the E&E, or was it based different?
It was all the same. The only thing they didn't have was the milling, thankfully, because I'm soft as hell. And they didn't have the fan dance. And by the time I went on training wing and was an instructor on selection. They had both. And I used to be a hare on the fan dance, and I would be carrying the same weight, in fact, a wee bit more than all the students. And, but back then, the hare could go as fast as he wanted to, and it was great. And I remember one day we did the fan dance, myself and this engineer's officer, in 2 hours 47. And he said to me, in fact, he kept pace with me, and he's talking to me all the way over the fan, and I could barely answer him. I knew if that guy wanted to, he could breeze past me and off into the sunset. Well, there was no sunset, it was raining. But, the guy was a flyer. I thought I was super fit. He was super fit, And then we did the turnaround point. We came all the way back again. And then, of course, you're seeing all the lads that are behind you because you're passing them at the turnaround point. And he's still talking to me, And as we go down to the final RV, which is the phone box at the Story Arms, 4 tonners are there. There's guys checking you in. And he says to me, well, it's okay for you, staff, with your lightweight Bergen, So, of course, I bit to that.
Yeah.
I'm like, come here. And I said, put your Bergen on the scales, which he had to do anyway, And his Bergen was 50 pounds as it should, 45 pounds as it should have been for the fan dance. And so I said, watch this. So I put my Bergen on. It was 48 pounds. And he was gutted. He's like, I am so, so sorry. And I would like to just take back every word that I said to you. And I said, listen, you're coming to the SAS. We lead by example. Not just the officers, everybody. We lead by example. And he got it. The poor guy, we got to the jungle phase and he just his body couldn't compete with the heat. He had some mechanism inside him and he would just hit heat exhaustion level. And he had to be choppered out at some stage, and it was a great loss. Had he not had that problem, I know even in those early stages, he would have made a great troop commander, He was a super, super guy,
That seems to be the thing. It's either you can, and we hear it a lot. It's not necessarily the fittest guy. I know really, really super, and I'm sure you do as well. Super fit guys, probably like that guy there that you're speaking of. Got to be really lucky to get through with the injuries. You kind of heat exhaustion. There's all sorts of things that kind of play a part.
I don't know what you've been told by other guys in the regiment that you know or you've had on your podcast, but when I was on training wing, we all used to look at the students, doesn't matter who they are, officers, lads, doesn't matter where they come from. We had divers from the Navy, we had TA guys from 2-1 and 2-3, we had all people from Australia, New Zealand, all over the place. All you've got to say to yourself is, would I go in operations with that guy? And if the answer is yes, he's in. It's quite simple, And of course, there are guys that come on selection and, they've got big bravados and, doesn't matter what unit they came from. It's just their personality. And that they would not get on with the rest of the troop,
Yeah.
You might go and have give them a bit of a chance and tell them what their problem is, and just take them away with a brew in your hand and just say, look, mate, this is where you are right now. So you either change your ways or you don't,
Suppose that's why kind of special forces selection is different to joining the Green Army, because you're pushed. They want to get the best out of you in kind of on SCS selection and stuff. So I hear you've got to want to be there. There's no, if you're not, there's no one pushing you. It's of your own merit, isn't it?
Yeah. You've got to want to be there or you're not going to make it. At the end of the day, though, you've got to remember, not you personally, people listening who may not have even been in the military. But you've got to remember that we were all something else before we joined the SAS. We all wore different cap badges. Some of us came from, different arms of the service, like me. I came from the RAF. So when they say that SAS soldiers are special, they're not. It's called the Special Air Service. It was called that in the Second World War. It was called that before the SAS became the SAS. The Special Air Service originally was the Parachute Regiment in the Second World War. That's what they called it. And they wanted the Germans to think the Special Air Service, there must be thousands of them, And then, David Stirling did what he did. He took the name, the Special Air Service, because the Parachute Regiment had then become the Parachute Regiment. And it's nothing to do with the guy being special. It's just the name of the unit. Yes, we have specialist tasks, but so do the Royal Engineers and other people,
Yeah.
So people have got to remember, we all came from different cap badges. We all amalgamated into this little unit, and we all work together now. And we're all small cogs in a bigger wheel, and we all need each other, despite where we came from. And there's none of this, all the paras sticking together, the Marines sticking together, the engineers sticking together. That'll never work, And once people have that in their heads, the SAS works really well, And of course, today, it's the same in the SBS because they get a bite of the same selection cherry. And the guys today can decide which one they want to join, the SAS or the SBS. And personally, I think that should have happened decades ago. When I was in, it should have happened. Because I went on operations where the SBS was sat on their arses because they were the SBS, and vice versa. And it's because we were being driven by different heads of departments,
Yeah.
At senior level. And it was bullshit. We needed those SBS lads. And when they were going on operations and they were short, they needed some of us as well, We all got on great. It's just hierarchy, writing their own historical, people can read about them in books later and all the rest of it. General so-and-so and, Brigadier so-and-so. And it's bullshit. It almost lost us the Falklands War, that kind of bullshit.
I remember seeing a documentary about that, about the naval, and it was the Marines and the paras. They didn't.
It was disgusting.
Ridiculous.
Well, it was all three services, It was disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And there's us at the low level, on board ships and everything, looking at each other, shaking our heads, because we're all the same.
Absolutely.
We all need each other. Yes, I'm all for cap badge rivalry and taking the piss. We've got, great black humour. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it in the world. The British military has got, in my view, the best humour in the world. Even when a mate dies, It's stinking, but it's great. It keeps us going, But at the end of the day, when we go to war as one. We don't go to war as a parachute regiment or the Marines or whatever, the Guards. We go to war as one because we all need each other.
Absolutely. I've said that quite recently on a post I put out about even now in post, for veterans. It's not about the colour of your beret or your cap badge. We all need to stick together as veterans, and help each other, the ones that are struggling.
Yeah, on that side, we're all breakable. We're all breakable. And that being in the fire service as well. The things that you have to put up with that you've seen and all your mates. And, I've been broken and I've got traumatic brain injury. And I only found out about that 5 years ago here in America. I've been in America for 12 years. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I was crying. If something upset me and the adrenaline got going, I'd start shaking. It started with my head and my neck, and then my shoulders, right down to my fingers. And then I started, I was frightening myself. It was like I couldn't breathe. And I remember I was with my wife and my daughter in northern Alabama. She'd gone to space camp. She wants to join NASA. And she's really bright, just takes after her dad, I don't think. And so she went to space camp in Alabama, and my wife and I were in this hotel. And outside it was 115 degrees. It was horrendous. I'm in a nice, cool hotel, and I've got to run out of it into the car park, lying on the car park surface, which is bubbling in the heat. And I'm just trying to breathe, looking up at the sky, trying to console myself, trying to take deep breaths, wondering what is wrong with me. And that then led to seizures. And my wife, thankfully, being the bright lady that she is like, you have now got to see a doctor. I'd seen 5 doctors. They were telling me it was pollen and stuff like that. And they're giving me, inhalers to breathe. And they're just making me dizzy, Anyway, I go to see this little Indian doctor. And she tells me that she was trained in the NHS in the UK. And I said, wow, that's amazing. Where were you trained? And she said, oh, you probably don't know, a little place called Hereford. and I'm living just outside New York City. I'm like, you're joking. She said, why, have you heard of it? I said, I've lived most of my life there, And so she was the first doctor to ask me my history. So off we went. She's like, I know exactly what's wrong with you, but I need you to go and see specialists so we can prove it. And here we are with traumatic brain injury.
Can they pinpoint what caused it?
Yeah. They cannot say 100%, nobody can, that you have traumatic brain injury until I die and they find my brain and they start slicing it up into little pieces and they see all the dead pieces within it. Yeah, and it's the same for rugby players, American football players, boxers, MMA people. It's just constant bashing. But when I joined the regiment, it was only a handful of years that the anti-terrorist team had begun. And that was after the Munich Olympics, when the PLO massacred the Israeli team, or members of the Israeli team, in 1972. So the SAS were the first in the world to get a military anti-terrorist team together. Now, when I joined the SAS, these lads were up in one part of Bradbury Lines, the Second World War camp, behind closed gates in an old Nissan hut with their little kit and their couple of Range Rovers, and nobody asked what they were doing. These people were handpicked from the squadrons to go and do this. Then, after a short period of time, it then became a half squadron commitment. Half the squadron would go to Northern Ireland, half the squadron would be on the anti-terrorist team. So that's how early it was. So I became involved in doing the explosive entry and stuff like that as a youngster, learning from others. But we were using rudimentary engineering explosives, PE4, rolling it up, putting it round windows, all that kind of stuff. And because I was a small lad, I'd always be at the front to get in first. And I was using the clacker and knocking myself out. And I remember waking up and the lads clad in the black gear are stood round me, said, Bob, are you okay? And it sounded like I was in underwater in a swimming pool as they're talking to me. That's what it was like, So doing that hundreds and hundreds of times and being in a killing house that was just a building turned into a killing house with rubber sheeting to catch the bullets, so the 9mm bullets would go through and then just drop, hit a piece of aluminium and just drop to the ground, having gone through the targets, So all the lead from all the firing wasn't going anywhere. We used to open a back door. It was just a 1-story brick building. That was the original killing house, or CQB house, close quarter battle house, before, the regiment actually got some decent money, redid the camp, and got a proper CQB house that could extract all the lead. So the
Wow.
mixture of lead poisoning and the constant battering of being
Yeah.
inside the overpressure of my own explosives, let alone all the stuff that you receive out in operations and stuff, And then, of course, 17 years of, like yourself, being on the circuit, and, being inside a couple of really big explosions of, suicide bombings. That's what did it, And
Yeah.
all I ask is that people that join the military today, and again, this should have happened a long time ago, but everybody's going like that when people are wondering what the hell's wrong with them. Yeah. That people that join today are told what may happen to them. And if it happens to them, either during or after their service, they're looked after immediately. Now, I've got mates that are dead now, and I have no doubt that whatever was put on their death certificate was not traumatic brain injury. It was alcoholism or whatever it was. Yeah. Alcoholism through traumatic brain injury. But that's not what it says. Because a lot of doctors, and I don't blame the doctors, at NHS, they're looking at what's right in front of them. Yeah. And they're not getting all the way back to the nitty gritties of what's really wrong with this individual, man or woman,
Yeah, it does. You're right there, and I that rings true to me, because my best friend, that we've known each other since we were 7, he went down the kind of SBS route from
Right.
Poweridge. Obviously, I won't
Okay.
mention his name, but he got a traumatic brain injury, and now he's still fighting the MOD to get a payout or get looked after properly.
Yeah.
I think we'll come on to that, because you've been
Yeah.
very
Yeah. I'm not, personally, I'm not fighting for anything. I know what happened. I'm living a normal life. I'm 70 years old. I'm still out running. I still do my pull-ups and my press-ups and my dips. I do my weights. I run with a Bergen. I can't ask for anything more. But I was in a different era. Now, younger people your age, and people who are in today deserve everything. They deserve everything because the knowledge is there now.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying the knowledge wasn't there when I was in. Maybe it was, and maybe it was hidden. I don't know. But I knew what I was getting into, and I accepted it. I accepted what I did as a security advisor out on the circuit. I accept all that. But I would want lads that join and lasses that join today to be told this is what could happen to you. And if it does happen, we will back you 100%.
Yeah,
That's the least they deserve.
that's fair, isn't it? It's a
Yeah, it's
fair.
absolutely fair in this day and age.
Yeah. And like you
It's
say,
happening in the sports world now.
yeah,
You look how rugby players, professional rugby players, are looked after now. You know, um, doesn't stop you playing rugby.
no,
Well,
but
it doesn't stop SAS and SBS guys doing what they do, or Royal Engineers and Parachute Regiment and everything else. You'll always do what you do. We train to go to war. War is the bloodiest thing you can come into, so it has to be real. I was talking to a journalist not long ago who's doing a story on traumatic brain injury. And he was saying, well, I've done a lot of research on the American side, and there's a lot of Navy SEALs are killing themselves, committing suicide. Why Navy SEALs? Why are they doing it? What's going on? And the Navy SEALs are addressing the problem, and they're using a lot of the training in the training theatre now. And I said, but that's fine, but that's not realistic training. You've got to train for real. You've got to. And, all the stuff that we did back in the regiment where, in the killing house and we were doing bus options for, coach options and aircraft options, and we'd have people, mixed inside the aircraft, and the snipers would be shooting into the bus and stuff like that, with live rounds. We were as realistic as possible. If that changes, then when you're ready to go on operations, you're not as ready as you could be if you're not training realistically. So the training theatre, to me, is a cost saving scenario that they've now said, oh, we're doing it to support traumatic brain injury and other things. Yeah, it's a cop out. You join the military, you've got to go with the flow. You've got to train as realistic as possible.
Absolutely.
But you've got to have the knowledge, because it has to be told to you that this is what can happen to you. And if you think it's happening to you, start shouting out early. None of this bravado shit, because, you're wearing the cat badge and you're frightened to be the weak person, You've got to share it. I didn't. And my wife was the one who suffered,
No,
the shit that she put up with, know.
It makes sense. Well, you talk about the CQB stuff there, which moves on quite nicely. What I'd like to talk about your role, if you're obviously, I'm aware of your obviously of what you can and can't say. But I had a couple of guys on that you will know, Robin Horsford and Rusty Phil, that were part of, Iranian Embassy. I'd like to know your kind of involvement in that, if you'd be happy to share.
Yeah, I was part of. There's a book just come out, and it came out in hardback last year, and it's just come out in paperback in the last couple of weeks, called The Siege by Ben McIntyre. Now, there's been films, entries, books, talks, you name it, all about the siege back in 1980. Okay, and here we are, 45 years later. And there's not that many of us left now. The siege book, I'm not promoting it, but it's probably the best thing I've read on the siege.
Really? Okay.
But it's not 100% correct, and it never will be. And I just want to throw this in before I talk about what I did. History. Now, I've read so much about what I've been on, because it's all out there. The Falklands War, the Iranian Embassy siege, the first Gulf War. And I'm like, that's not what happened, And a lot of people write books, they're military historians or whatever. They interview people, they get paperwork together, and they're like, oh, it must be right. It's on the paperwork. They've got the manifest, they've got who did what, blah, blah, blah. But you know yourself, even in the parachute regiment, in the SAS, things go awry very quickly. And the job that you're manifested to do, you don't end up doing, because you're pulled off to go and do something else, right? So you can't say things happened historically because it's on the manifest. So the point I'm trying to make is, anybody that reads a book about military history, there could be a good bit in there that's not right. There was a Royal Marines lieutenant colonel who wrote a book about the Falklands, and he said that a certain mission that the SAS did, that I happened to be on, didn't come about. It didn't take part in a submarine. Okay, I'll talk about that later. Well, it did, because I was on it. So military history, or any other form of history, even modern history, which we're all part of, isn't 100% true. So anyway, back to the siege. I had a bit part, as we all did, and sometimes chicken, sometimes feathers. If you're the ones that abseiled down onto the balcony and went in where the so-called terrorists were, fantastic, you had a great day. If you were at the top floor, third floor, which I was, and there's nobody there and you didn't fly around, well, eat your feathers, So the job I had was to put the explosive down above the light well that went down through all the floors, so that it was a distraction. When it went off, everybody inside was made to look inwards towards where the light well was, down through the building. Okay, so it was the biggest explosion of the day. It was the first explosion of the day, and if anybody watches the short YouTube 8.5 minutes BBC video of the Iranian embassy, they'll hear a big bang, then they'll hear some journalists going, "That was a bomb, that was a bomb," and then 30 odd seconds later, you'll see John McLeish and the rest of them going onto the front balcony that everybody else has seen. Okay? That 30 seconds was 30 seconds too long. They should have been on that balcony and in when my explosion went off. Because that's the idea of the distraction. Let everybody look in, then everybody swings in together. Okay? So, as Mike Tyson once said, you're only as good as the first punch you receive, then everything's out the window, Well, that's the same on that operation, and probably most operations that you and I have both taken part in. Nothing really goes to plan, so it's up to you. Stepping stone. People around you. If you're not making it work, the guy next to you makes it work, and so on, So it worked out at the end of the day, but lots and lots of things went wrong. And it wasn't the magnificent operation that people talk about today. We have trained for it. We're on the team. We train for it every day of the week. We liaise with as many police units around the UK as we can to have exercises. And of course, they're on double time at the weekend. We're not. We're away from our families. We've just worked all week in Hereford, in the CQB house or down the road doing other things, So it was the early days of the anti-terrorist team. Lots of things went wrong, and it was the opportunity to learn from that big style before the next event, because it could be the next day, So we had to get our heads together very quickly after it. A lot of money was given to the anti-terrorist team, a lot of new kit. Instead of having an old, pair of cotton overalls, we had Nomex overalls and, fireproof overalls. And we went off to the fire service and we learned lots from the local fire school. There's one not far from Hereford and in Gloucestershire. I can't remember the name of it, but we went there and we learned so much from the fire brigade. So we were learning from everybody. We were looking outwards. We weren't this little unit that would just look at ourselves and learn from ourselves. We were looking to everybody to learn from. And then, of course, at that time, I would suggest that we were still the best in the world. And then we had Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 and the Germans and the French and lots of other people taking a huge interest and would send people to them. And now everybody's mixing it together and learning from one another, So that it seems an eternity ago. To me, it just seems like it was yesterday. But it was the humble beginnings of something that could only get better,
Yeah.
So we were very lucky on the siege, just like we were very lucky, in unison down in the Falklands to win that war, We could have lost that very easily,
But the old saying goes, as you'll have heard many times, adapt and overcome. And like you say, everyone has that plan initially. And then I think that's the level, like with the SAS, is like, so yeah, stuff does go wrong, but you've got that tools in the arsenal to kind of adapt and overcome it when it does, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter what your kit is or what you're wearing, what you have to hand. If you haven't got it, what are you going to do? Just put your head through the window or something, You're wearing a respirator. That there's always a way to get round it, And you're talking about guys that had very simple explosives, The explosive that I laid, it was just a ball of PE. That's all it was, And a guy behind me, I didn't set it off. I laid it. My mate behind me with the clacker, he's the one who set it off. It was all very, very basic kit. A couple of lads with 10, 15 pound sledgehammers, and away we went, There was pistols falling on the floor and all sorts because the way we secured the pistols with the equipment that we had just wasn't good enough. We were training, but on the day it's a whole different ball game. You're under an awful lot of pressure. You're not under pressure training. Nobody's under pressure training. But when you're doing it for real, that's when the pressure starts, and that's when you see. Some of the lads, that even in the SAS, it's no different from any other unit. When you look at the weak link to the strongest individual, even in the SAS, it's huge. It's huge. It's the way of life. It's the way it is. You look at, Bath Rugby Club, Liverpool Football Club. You look at the worst player on the pitch to the best player on the pitch. Even at that level, it's huge. Well, it's the same with the SAS. It's the same with the Parachute Regiment and everybody else. Now, just because you're the weak link doesn't mean to say you need to be shafted. We're all the weak link at some point. When I was on, we did pre-para in the RAF Regiment. Now, initially in the 60s, lads were sent down to do P Company. The ones that passed it came back and they tried to mimic the P Company. And I think they did to some level, okay? So when I did the pre-para, I remember doing the stretcher race. I was a little frail kid. That's all I was. Didn't shave, didn't have any strength, but I had a huge heart. It's the hardest thing I ever did. I was crying my eyes out because the other three lads were bigger than me and the stretcher was just smashing off my tiny little shoulders, And, so I was the weakest link at that point. I breezed pre-para. I breezed through it, but I didn't at that point. Well, it's the same in the SAS. When you're on a patrol, on an operation, somebody in that patrol is the weak link, but it doesn't mean to say they have to go, It could be the troop officer. It could be the patrol commander, or it could be the lad who just come off selection. It depends what you're doing,
Everyone, like you say as well, everyone has them skills to bring to the table. They could, they might not be particularly strong in one topic, but then they'll have the skill that they'll bring to the table in something else. And like you say, I think that it's like part of like the working together as a team. Certainly in them sort of high pressure situations, that's what counts, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when I joined the SAS, it was everything was based on the figure 4. All right, so it was 4 men in a patrol, 4 patrols in a troop, 4 troops in a squadron, 4 squadrons in 2 SAS. That was it. Okay. I never went on a 4-man patrol because a 4-man patrol isn't viable. If one man goes down, what are you going to do? So we had 6-man patrols. So you could be 2 3s, you could be 3 2s, or you could be 6 men. So if somebody went down, say, on a jungle operation, he just went down with an illness. 1 man could stay with him. The other 4 can continue the operation, come back and pick them up, and then extract and away. Just as an example. So it's all about moving forward. It's all about people's ideas. Somebody came up with that idea. 4-man patrols. This is bullshit. And and explained the reason why. It's no good saying bullshit and then somebody goes, why? Oh, because I think it is.
Well, that's the military
You're going to say bullshit, explain the reason why it's bullshit,
That's a proper military thing. That it's shit. Well, why is it shit? It is. That's the thing.
Yeah, but that's how the regiment works, and it could be the greenest guy in the regiment, but he's not actually green militarily, and the greenest guy in the regiment is normally the troop commander, okay, because he's come from from outside. He's now the troop commander, and what does he know? So a decent troop commander spends 2 years close to the troop staff sergeant, learning from him, learning from the rest of the troop, so that when he comes back as squadron commander, if he's chosen, he's that much better. As opposed to, I'm the troop commander. what says goes. Well, that doesn't work.
I can't imagine that goes down too well. And
Well, I was very lucky. I ended up with, when I was Troop Staff Sergeant, I had an awesome troop commander, and he worked his arse off as well. He's a terrific guy. And
awesome.
unbelievably, he came from the Guards. So I don't know where he got it from. Because he had a Batman.
No, worries.
I'm joking. Any
No.
Guards people?
No, well, like we know the banter. I work with an RAF guy. My best friend on my watch with the fire service is ex-RAF, and he gives me
Okay.
shit, I give him shit. The banter, like you said, is something to be massively kind of. I'm proud of the banter. I'm proud that it almost makes you bulletproof. The banter is like I pride myself on being unoffendable. You can't offend me because I've
Yeah.
had a lifetime of I've been from 17 and I've been a firefighter now for 13 years and
You must have skin like an elephant.
like a rhino's balls, my skin, I tell you. No, so obviously kind of moving on from the embassy siege, the next kind of big event that was in the limelight, if you like, was obviously something that I have a lot of friends that kind of, it was when I joined the parachute regiment, I looked up to the guys, the Falklands veterans and
Of
stuff.
course.
They were our heroes,
Yeah, they were amazing.
Your part in the Falklands, really.
Yeah. Well, the regiment with the 4 squadrons at the time worked on a roement system. So there's a squadron in training. There's a squadron committed away on operations. There's a squadron taking a little bit of leave or doing skills, and a squadron away doing an exercise somewhere, So at the time of the Falklands War, we were the ones ready to go to war. So we were in the best place possible. However, it was decided that we would do this Entebbe raid type scenario on Stanley Airfield. We would fly all the way down there, 2 Hercules, come off on our pinkies, attack the airfield, back on and away. And then that was shelved. And because of ships were started to sink, we're not going to Stanley Airfield, we're going to the airfield where the super étendards are firing their missiles at our ships on the Argentine coastline, mainland, sorry. So we're training for all that. And of course, I'm ex-RAF Regiment. We're doing these scenarios on RAF airfields that are coastal. And my mates are coming to me saying, we saw you 15 miles out. We had you blowing out the sky 15 miles out. And I'm bringing it up. And the hierarchy above the squadron commander doesn't want to know. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. We go all the way to Ascension Islands. We're still prepped to do this. The lads down south losing more and more ships. They send a helicopter with 8 guys, or well, the lads fly down, parachute into the South Atlantic, picked up by ship, put on a helicopter. They go into Argentina, stroke Chile, and the helicopter crew think they're pinged, so they fly into Chile, ditch the helicopter. The lads get on the run to the safe RV. The pilot and the crew burn out the helicopter, hands up. They're with the Chilean authorities now, and our lads and them eventually get out. And it's all written about. I'm not telling anything I shouldn't be.
I've heard that.
Out there. Anyway, we're then told, and of course we've had the dreadful helicopter crash where we lost all the lads in G Squadron and D Squadron. So 8 of us are now prepped to go down there, help out D Squadron, but do a build-up down there to get on an O-class submarine to go to Argentina and do what the helicopter guys were supposed to do that ended up in Chile. So we do a build-up on the submarine. It's an O-class submarine, and we're doing offline islands to the main islands of the Falklands. Some have Argentinians on, some don't. And we're in this situation where we have 2 SBS coxswains, good lads, and they take us in 2 boats drop us off, and then we do the reversal where we get back on the submarine. And we're just trying to cut down the time of everything. So we build our boat on the casing of the submarine when it comes to the surface. We get them as quickly as possible, engines on, pumped up, we're in, slide off the submarine, off to the mainland. Well, that's what these islands were supposed to be, the mainland. We're lying cross-legged on the beach, waiting for the submarine to come back. And all of a sudden, I get a kick from the guy to the right. And every kick is an Argentinian soldier coming towards us. And the kicks got more and more and more. We're like, oh my God. And then I'm looking to my right, and just up the beach, I can see all these heads coming down towards us. And we're like, there's only 8 of us. There's about 30 of them now, you know. Are we going to lie low, or are we just going to ambush them and just go for it, you know? Then all of a sudden, I can hear one of the lads to my right. He starts going, what the fuck is that smell? And then somebody starts giggling. And then it's penguins. It's not Argentinian soldiers. It's penguins, and they're stinking of fish, you know? Because the wind's coming from their direction, you know? And it's like a quarter moonlight night, and the clouds are going and coming back. So sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. But, you know, just the vision of these heads coming down the beach, you know. And we're still laughing on the submarine, you know.
Be a slaughter of penguins, that.
Yeah, well, yeah, my goodness. Anyway, we do the build-up training. We go back to D Squadron. We do a couple of operations with D Squadron on the Falkland Islands, and then we get towed back into the submarine. We go back to the submarine. We get picked up, and we head to Argentina, and we do the periscope recce of the mainland. We come back out, and we just lie on the bottom of the ocean, waiting for Margaret Thatcher to say, you can go in. She tells us we can go in. We lift off the ocean, off the ocean floor. We're going in towards Argentina. And then the captain of the submarine is told, pull out, pull out, pull out. And we pull out. And that's because the Argentinians on the Falkland Islands had surrendered. So they obviously heard we were coming, you know. We were not officially under international law at war. Now, if we had set foot on Argentinian soil and got killed or captured, or even if we'd been successful at taking out the super étendards, there would have been hell to pay. But that's what we had to do because we were losing the war at that point, you know? So it was a tough old operation, and it was a little bit like parachuting. You know, you stood in the door and then you're waiting for the green light to come on, and it doesn't come on because the guy on the grounds are saying the wind's too high. You've got all that adrenaline, and what are you going to do with it? So we're on the submarine. All the submariners, that O-class submarine had broken every record under the sun, been away from Portsmouth for so long, you know? And so all the submariners who were pasty white, they'd never seen daylight, they were all cheering, the war's over, the war's over. We're all sat there, chins on the floor, you know? You know, with just pumped full of adrenaline. It's only, less than an hour ago, we were making our way to the shore, you know? That was it. That was us, you know?
Yeah,
We end up back on the Falkland Islands, and the 8 of us remain there when everyone else is heading back to the UK. So we'd gone through the Falklands War. They were worried that the Argentinians could have a second shot. So the Port Stanley now becomes a garrison. There's people marching around and shaved and haircuts. We're walking around in Navy handouts with long hair and Armalites with magazines on. And the military police are like, get that magazine off. We're like, no. So the patrol commander had to go and see the the RSM, who was a guards RSM, and say, look, just leave us alone, And the guy was great. He's like, yeah, no problem at all, We know where you're staying, and if you need anything, just come and see me. He was fantastic, And we had all this ammunition while we were waiting. We were there for weeks, really pissed off, but thinking that, we could be used again, So we had all that time to train. We had all the ammunition. We had grenade launchers. We had, well, just basically everything to fire and get a eye in with. It was great, But but then eventually we headed back as well, and I arrived back in Hereford straight on another course, like nothing had ever happened.
Well, it's a
So I
bit
just
like,
had to get my head back in gear.
yeah, I heard from friends
Very
they like,
little time with my family.
yeah, it's course after course, isn't it? And
Yeah,
that skill set up and expanding that
yeah,
skill set.
yeah, yeah,
So obviously you come back from the Falklands, and then obviously your next, I'm sure there would have been lots of training courses, excuse me,
yeah.
and probably island throughout the kind of 80s and stuff that you'd have been on. And
Yeah,
then,
there's a lot of jobs in between that are small that we call team jobs. That back then it wasn't just training; it was semi-operations as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on between all these ones that we all know about that we don't even talk about today. So you're away doing that as well. So your adrenaline's pumped up for that kind of stuff too. And then you come back to your family and you try and decompress. You're away on a course, or you're away on another operation, or you know. And there's never enough fuel to feed the fire. There's never enough lads getting through selection. To my troop at one point was 6 guys. It's supposed to be 16. 6 guys. That's not a patrol. And no troop officer. And it's just not enough people getting through selection. And goodness knows what it's like today, because the armed forces today are the smallest they've ever been in history. Well, you need that fuel to feed the fire, both the SAS and the SBS.
and you also need units the people to be joining the regular army in the first place to feed the special forces.
Yeah. If
So
you got
if people aren't joining the military, then everything suffers.
And there's loads of officers, especially towards the end of my time, there were a lot of great officers that were getting to the rank of major and pulling the plug, or maybe lieutenant colonel, and pulling the plug. You can't lose officers of that ilk, and that was happening all the time. And I know when I was on the circuit and I was looking after the media, and we'd be embedded with the Americans and the Brits, the French, the Canadians in Iraq, Afghanistan. So you get talking to the lads, the Royal Marines, the Army, everybody else, and they're telling you, you're talking to the officers as well. And the guy, this major's like, the end of this trip, I'm out of here. I'm not staying in the military for this shit. Take the lads out, get blown up, come running back. Next day, take the lads out, get blown up, come running back.
That's kind of what happened. Well, you'll remember it well. Obviously, the second Gulf War, when the Iraq War, that decimated. That's when I went out to do the cruise, 2000, and that decimated a lot of the units, because it was the same. It was a bit like, why would I be in the military with all this bullshit and shit wages when I can go and earn a full fortune doing the same sort of thing out in Iraq and foreign countries?
Yeah, no. On my travels, I met loads of lads that's exactly what they did. And you can't blame them. You can't blame them. But
You're only here once. You've got to make it count, haven't you? So
yeah, no, absolutely.
The kind of next major kind of conflict that you were involved in was obviously the first Gulf War in '91. What was your kind of role within that? If you're happy to chat,
it's quite funny, really. I was in a position in Hereford where I could adapt my program to run away to war, if you like. So I went to see a mate of mine who was the sergeant major of A Squadron. And I'm like, take me with you. He's like, absolutely, He goes, you'll go to boat troop, you'll be a trooper, but you'll have your say in every get together that we have. I'm like, great. So we did all the build up training. And then B Squadron, which I belonged to, initially, had lost its middle management. They were spread all over the world doing other stuff. So because I was B Squadron, I was asked to come back to B Squadron. And then a funny thing happened. Well, it wasn't so funny. An unusual thing happened for the SAS. I was given a NORBAT to become the leader of Bravo 20. So I looked down the Orbat and I'm like, I'm not taking some of these lads for specific reasons. They just come off selection. They don't have any SAS skills. They're not bad lads, but I need lads for this particular operation that are all doubled up on signals, on medics, on explosives, on Arabic, that kind of thing, So I went round the squadron, asked lad, because I'd been away from the squadron for a while, been on training wing and stuff, asked the lads on troop staff sergeant of G Squadron. So I hadn't been in B Squadron for a wee while. So I asked all these lads what skills they had. So I changed the Orbat, went to the squadron sergeant major and said, these are the lads I want to take. I'll tell you who you're taking. I'm like, hang on a minute, mate. And we're in the SAS, Listen, you just do as you're told. So I'm like, well, fuck you. That's not what I came here for. So I jumped to D Squadron. There was another mate who was the sergeant major and had a fantastic time with D Squadron. And unfortunately, the sergeant major was shot. And in the wee hours of the morning, I went to take him a brew, and I had my torch, and I looked at his jacket, and he had a tiny little hole in the back of his jacket, and he could barely talk, So I lifted and it was freezing, really bitter cold. So I lifted his jacket, and sure enough, the shirt had a little hole, his vest had a little hole, and under his vest was the entry wound, and it was that small caliber from the AK type weapon that I had this. I can't remember the caliber, 5 something. Yeah, it's like 5.75 or something like that. It's a tiny little caliber weapon. So he'd been shot by that, and of course the lads, because we had to get away from the contact area, the lads had just patched up what they saw first, which was his exit wound. So we had to get him out. And Delta Force, which was over to a flank from us, had lost some lads and had some lads wounded. So they had a helicopter coming in the following day. And they said, we're happy to bounce across and pick up, your SSM. And he was adamant he wasn't going out. So that didn't happen. On the return journey from picking up the Delta Force lads, and the Delta Force RSM was on the chopper as a bit of, showing the lads that, look, I'm here for you. It piled in as soon as it crossed into Saudi Arabia, and they were all killed. So we held on to Steve for a few more days, and then a British Chinook came in to resupply us and took Steve out. And I never saw Steve again till obviously the end of the war, when we crossed the border by Pinky vehicles, and he was there to greet us. So I had a fantastic war with D Squadron, So so that was my Gulf story. Didn't take Bravo 20, switched to D Squadron, had a complete blast.
Well, we talk about fate, don't we, a lot,
Yeah. You talk about fate, but you've also got to stand up for yourself, and I remember going to the Bravo 20 lads and saying, fellas, take a vehicle. You know, the Second World War, the SAS found out that they can't go in the desert on foot. That was
Too
a
vast.
long time ago.
It's
You
too
know,
vast. It's too, yeah.
and
Fair.
I make no qualms about it. A parachute regiment patrol would have done a better job. I make no qualms about it. Well, we're all human, aren't we? We're all human. But there are people in places that need to speak out when things are not going right. And there were plenty of people around that needed to speak out to put that right and didn't.
Yeah, and that's that thing again, isn't it? It's about having that audacity, and having that character to,
Yeah,
to kind of. And I like to think that's what sets certain units like the SS apart. Like, and obviously leaders. I believe that makes a good leader as well. If you're willing to speak up for your kind of
yeah,
your blokes, your troop,
yeah,
if you're willing to speak up, and it might not be in your best interest. Well, not in
yeah,
your best interest, but it might not go down well. But you've
yeah.
got to have that character to do that, haven't you? And obviously,
I,
you
I
did.
you look at the Orbat. It's no different than than a company in a parachute regiment. You've got the company commander, you've got his two IC, you've got everybody else going down from that. Well, we have a squadron commander, we have the squadron sergeant major, we have the SQMS, who is destined to be the next squadron sergeant major. Then you have your troop staff sergeants, and all the way down from there. Where are they? Where are they? So there are times where people have got to start speaking out.
No, absolutely. Moving
Anyway,
on from Iraq, obviously,
yeah,
kind of towards the back end of your career, we have the
yeah,
Bosnia kind of conflict, which was
yeah.
not. I think that gets overlooked with modern conflicts because it wasn't.
I
Would you agree with that statement? It gets a bit
Yeah,
overlooked.
my Bosnia bit was just a bit part. Um, I was in this. I'm going to talk about a funny situation again, which wasn't funny. Um, it's funny now. I'm 70. I I ended up as the senior military instructor of the jungle school for 2 years, which is where I wanted to finish because I loved the jungle, and it was always a tied Warrant Officer 1 SAS post because the SAS were the people at that time that kept going to the jungle. So we're more jungle orientated than anybody else in the British military. So it made sense for that an SAS guy of that ilk to be the chief instructor. So I always wanted to finish there. While I was there, the RSM and um, the, the Lieutenant Colonel of T2 SAS came out to visit me and visit selection as well at the same time. And they took me aside and they said, and they're two cracking lads as well, we would like you to come back, not leave the regiment, stay in, become the RSM, and then take a full SAS career to your 55 with a commission. And I was always keen on leaving at 40. I'd looked at lads when I was young in the regiment that stayed in over 40, and I just didn't want to be one of them. I wanted to go and do something else. That would be the end of my SAS career because I just wanted to soldier. Anyway, I kind of mulled it over and I thought, well, maybe I'll give it a go. So I arrived back in Hereford with my family, got a couple of days off to sort my stuff out and everything. And I go in and I have this meeting and they're like, oh, Bob, of course, in order to become RSM, you have to be the SQMS of B Squadron in the stores for about 6 weeks, and then the SSM of B Squadron for about another 6 weeks, because you need those stepping stones behind you before you can become the RSM. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll do that, And it just didn't work out. It was a personality thing, you know. I'd had 2 years, fantastic years at the jungle school. I was at loggerheads with the hierarchy of B Squadron, and I had gone on 2 recce's. One was to the jungle, one was to Bosnia, for the B Squadron trip to Bosnia. And I saw how everything operated, and one of the lads was killed out there when I was there, and I was in the ops room and it was all going on. And I'm like, this is just outrageous. You can't be talking to both sides 1 minute, talking about land disputes and things like that, and then becoming the SAS aggressor the next minute. You can't do both. You do one or the other. You know, it was a crazy scenario. So I came back, and I voiced my opinion, and I came back, and I spoke to my family, and I said, I'm leaving. And I went and spoke to the RSM. I was over 2 hours with the colonel, and I left, and I cried like a baby, walked out the gates, having handed in my ID card, and I had a job all set up to go to, you know, and I cried like a baby. A little bit of it was through frustration. A little bit of it was that my great life of the SAS had come to an end, you know. I'd been in it from a young lad, 20 to 40, you know.
Yeah.
And it had gone like that, you know. And yeah, I think it all came rushing through my head as I was walking home.
Big part of your life to suddenly kind of end so
Mm,
abrupt. No one ever prepares you for your military. I mean, I only spent 7 years in the military, so
yeah,
I can't relate. But having spent 20, 25, some guys spent,
yeah.
30 years in the military.
It probably went as fast as your 7 years, you know. They went really, really quick because you never look back. You're always looking forward, you know. And then, of course, all of a sudden, you get into this, you know, the RSM and the colonel were doing me a massive favor, you know. Bob, you're the guy that we want to do this, that, you know. And I'll forever thank them for that. But it just didn't work out, you know. And of course, there were people to do with Bravo 20 and a few other things that I had spoken with that, in my view, should never have been in the regiment after the scenario. And of course, they're not still in the regiment, they're promoted as well, you know. And I'm like, I'm out of here, I'm gone, you know. But that was just that's just me personally, you know. And but that was my decision making. And I'm sat here now. I had 17 amazing years where working with journalists, 1 to 2 mostly, a cameraman and a correspondent and me, going off to do certain things and achieving certain things. I probably did more risky stuff with them than I ever did in the regiment, you know? And
But you haven't got that backup behind you, have you? I
yeah,
always
no, you know, there's no cavalry. There's nobody on your left and right supporting you. You're on your arse. You're on your own. And if you've made that wrong decision, you're going to have to live with it, you know? And I was lucky, you know? A lot of it was to do with my background and my mindset. A lot of it was to do with luck as well, you know? But I spent 17 years. I never lost anybody. I never had anybody captured. I never had anybody wounded. We had some great stories, and I had an absolute ball. I went to some places that you would never get near today, you know. It was great, you know. Nuristan in Afghanistan, where the Americans had their arses kicked and their position overran, you know. I mean, one of the most beautiful places on earth. Beautiful people, but they didn't want anybody. They didn't want people from the next valley coming to their valley, let alone the Americans. You
yeah,
know,
that's a fair
but,
point.
but
Yeah.
yeah, great stuff. You know.
No, well, before we finish off, Bob, because obviously I'm conscious I've kept you for an hour and a
Oh,
half.
you're fine, mate. You're fine.
I
Thank
could
you.
talk to you all night. It's fascinating. I want to ask you. I've seen a piece recently, and this is what kind of I've known of you for years and
Sure.
books, but it was something I read the other day, and I think it was shared by another SES veteran who
Okay.
you know, and it was about the kind of current investigations of special forces by,
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
just wanted to kind of literally hear
Yeah.
what you have to say
Yeah.
about that, and my
Yeah.
views are
I
more than
wrote. I wrote a blog post about it. So, those that are interested, if you want to jump on bobshepardauthor.com, I post from time to time. It's mainly security issues, but lately it's also been like you're doing as well, talking about, lads that have kind of traumatic brain injury or something else and have become very insular, So I'll blog when I need to blog, but I did blog about that. And I just think that the senior officers and the politicians need to walk a mile in their boots. It's as basic as that. And they've got lads and lasses today, but, in our sense, it was lads that, risked their lives. Every time I go back to Hereford, I see some mates that are buried that didn't get to 30. Now, they did the kind of stuff that, to the letter of the law, and they didn't get to the age of 30. Now, they're mixed. They're in this as well because they went on these events. And I'm a firm believer that today's SAS is no different to the SAS I was in. In 23 years military service and almost 20 years in the SAS, I never once, and the lads around me never once, went against the law. Not once. And there were times where our enemy had no laws. And we treated our enemy, first Gulf War, we took a position and there were 8 enemy, and we led them out into the desert with shawls and stuff to stay warm and a bucket of water and some of our food, and we didn't have much ourselves, and then went on to our next target. We didn't shoot them because they were enemy, and I don't believe for a minute some of the stuff that's come out. I think it's more Afghan special forces that did not get the opportunity to come to the United Kingdom with their families post-Taliban. Okay? I think it's as simple as that. So they have a grievance and they're taking it out on the lads that they operated with.
And let's be honest, like anything to do with the SES in the news it's popular. So they put that in there. They know full well, the journalists, they put a story up, something like that. It's going to be a big hitter.
Well, the panorama, there is not one shred of evidence that they came up with. They had actors, false names, If you're going to come up with something, have it in your fist and deliver it. Panorama didn't do that. Shame on them. Because the SAS, those 3 letters, I'm incredibly proud of. The Parachute Regiment, every other cap badge. Because like I said, we all need each other when it comes to war. I'm proud of my past, and I'm proud of the young lads and lasses today that do their thing. And they deserve to be backed to the hilt by the government. Now, the government aren't saying a dicky bird about that panorama program, and walk a mile in those lads' shoes first before you try to take them down, and have the evidence in your hand to prove it,
Absolutely. And it's an age-old thing. It's easy for them to sit there in their offices and behind whatever desks and criticize a spare of the moment decision or a situation where it's life or death, and then criticize it. You don't have that luxury when you're on the ground in that position, do you?
Yeah, no, you don't. You don't. When you're in a tight situation and you're walking forward and the danger is coming at you at every angle in a millisecond, and you have to react within the laws, then you need to be back to the hilt for that. And I have no doubt the modern SAS is no different to the ancient SAS, the last century soldier that I was. We were at the top of our game. They're at the top of their game. Back them, because I know the American government backed their tier 1 soldiers. So do the same to ours. you know.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Bob. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you, mate. Thank you.
What have you got coming up? Anything that you'd like to talk about or promote or you just kind of you
No,
got slippers on
just
now, Bob?
it,
Is it piping slippers or?
I'm an avid gardener. It keeps me sane. And like I say, I'm still trying to keep fit. I've got 7 kids and 7 grandkids to keep up with. So I'm just an aging civilian right now and loving it, you know. Um, I blog from time to time, and I like to think it's a decent read. I get pretty good feedback. Sometimes the subject may not be popular. For example, Israel Palestine is a little bit of a nitty gritty thing to get into, but I spent 18 months with the media when they had their last big shindig. It was called the Second Intifada, and it was pretty bloody. And I was in Gaza in the West Bank for a fair whack of that 18 months, on both sides, you know, embedded with the Israelis, embedded with Hamas and some of the other, you know, Al-Aqsa martyrs and some of the other people, and in the middle with just normal Palestinians and normal Israelis trying to get on with their lives. I was 46 when I went out there, and it was a huge eye opener to me to believe or to make sure that I only believed what I witnessed. I will never believe what I read or what the TV tells me because they all have an agenda. I'll only believe what I see myself, you know?
Yeah, it's a
So,
very, very good point, Bob. And
yeah,
it's something I genuinely, from my past experiences working in the
sure.
Middle East, go
Yeah,
off what I see with my own 2 eyes and not
yeah,
what the media portray.
yeah.
Exactly nail on the head because they
Uh,
always have an agenda. Always.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They want to
I mean,
point
there
you.
are, if you dig deep into my blog, because, you know, anything you have online, those that own it, and I won't go any further than that, people can find out who own it. If you mention certain countries or certain names, you'll be wiped off or you'll be put to the back of the queue. So instead of having 100,000 clicks, you'll have 100, you know? Um, so you might have to dig a wee bit deep into my blog, but I have blogged about the Israel Palestine scenario. Um, I know for a fact, going all the way back to when this last one began with the horrendous Hamas attack across into Israel, that Israel knows when somebody farts in Gaza. So when they say that they had a 9 hour lapse of security coming or the cavalry coming to help those people, I kind of say to myself, there's something not quite right here. That's all I need to say because that's all I know. Yeah. But I've got a lot of Jewish friends over here in America and back home who are of the same opinion. And some of them are Israeli American. Okay. So there's something not quite right. You live next to Gaza, you know there's a chance of something really nasty happening to you. And therefore, you need an immediate cavalry scenario to come and help you. And how Hamas, by hand, in some respects, can drag Israelis all the way across that open ground back into Gaza, you know, for that length of time in broad daylight, there's something going on. Some questions need answered, and that's one of them. So somebody might want to read what I have to say about that. It's in my
Uh,
blog.
I
Okay?
will. I'll put your links to the blog in the podcast when I
That'll
put
be
it out.
cool. That'll be
And
cool.
have
But
a
people that, you know, this is the big story of the day. It's not Ukraine. It's this because of the way that, you know, I don't care who you are, but when little children are looking like skeletons, that reminds me of 80 years ago. Yeah. And it should never, ever happen again. It's happening right now. and something needs to be done very, very quickly.
No,
All right.
well,
All right.
thank you very much, Bob, for your kind
Not
of
at all, Chris.
insight and an insight into your career. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I will talk with you in a second off air when I stop the recording.
Sure, mate. I just want to say on air, thank you for what you do, mate, and thank you for your fire service too. That's huge.
Coming from someone like yourself, Bob, that means a hell of a lot to me. So thank you very
Thank
much.
you, mate. Thanks very much.
Again, the pleasure's been all mine by having you on the podcast, and yeah, I'll keep you updated with the podcast and stuff, and hopefully I'll catch up with you in the future, pal.
Thank you, mate.
Cheers, pal.
Hit the ground, no sound but the wind jumped out the sky where the real work begins. Iraq heat, cold steel on the front line, security tight, walking edge of a landmine. Somali seas, deck slick with the salt, eyes sharp, never blink, never halt. Surveillance in the mist, eyes on the prize. UK streets to foreign skies, from fire calls to bare knuckle rings, still fighting demons that memory brings. Kevin, tune in now, feel the truth get louder. This is the old paratrooper, no powder, no script, no mask, no lies, just facts. Mental health raw in boots or slacks, ADHD to the PTS pain. We're breaking silence, not playing games. Old paratrooper podcast, stay locked in. Stories from the edge where the healing begins.